Elena noticed that I had stopped asking for her opinion on everything. An email arrived from work one Tuesday morning. A position had opened at the company's New York headquarters and management wanted to know whether I'd be interested in transferring. Normally, I would have forwarded the email to Elena immediately. What do you think? Should I apply? That was how things had always been. Instead, I filled out the application, attached the required documents, and hit send. Only afterward did it occur to me that I hadn't mentioned it to her at all. The realization felt strange, not painful, just unfamiliar. Then Sam's wedding invitation arrived. Caleb vanced and guested. I RSVPd for one. When it came time to send the wedding gift, I mailed a separate check and never asked Elena whether she wanted to attend. Again, I didn't think about it until later. By then, the decision had already been made. The biggest change came when my doctor informed me that I'd need a minor surgical procedure. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to require anesthesia and an overnight stay. I researched specialists. I handled the insurance paperwork. I sat through consultations. I scheduled the surgery. Every step was done alone, which was ironic because Elena Mercer was one of the most respected surgeons in Seattle. When she eventually found out, her reaction was immediate. "You're sick," she asked, frowning. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question slipped through the room like a knife. Before I could stop myself, the answer came naturally. I handled it. "Don't worry." Silence. The air froze. Both of us stared at each other. Just 2 weeks earlier, I would have been texting her photos of restaurant menus, Italian or steakhouse. "Do you think this wine is too expensive? Does this tie work for your gala?" I used to agonize over every little detail. Not because I couldn't decide, because I wanted her opinion, because including her felt natural. Back then, she'd answer. Then her responses became shorter. "Either one looks fine." Eventually, she stopped responding altogether. Messages lingered on read for hours, sometimes days. I told myself she was busy. She was a surgeon, after all. Surgeons saved lives. Surgeons worked impossible hours. Surgeons didn't always have time to text back. That's what I believed until I realized Elena wasn't busy with everyone, just with me. She always seemed to have time for Liam, the son of her late mentor, the man she promised to look after, the man who somehow occupied every spare corner of her life. The surgery was scheduled for tomorrow. The attending physician handed me a clipboard. His tone was routine, professional. "Dr. Mercer is still attending a conference overseas. If you prefer to wait until she returns, we can reschedule." "No," I signed the final page. "Tomorrow is fine." The doctor nodded. No questions, no hesitation. Just another patient making another decision. As I exited the office, the elevator doors opened at the far end of the hallway. Two familiar figures appeared. Elena and Liam. Elena was dragging a carry-on suitcase behind her. Her dark hair was slightly disheveled from travel, and exhaustion lingered beneath her eyes. She looked like she'd come directly from the airport. Liam walked beside her, his hands tucked into the pockets of an expensive black cashmere coat, a very familiar coat. My stomach tightened. It was my coat, the one I had left at Elena's apartment 8 months ago and assumed I'd simply forgotten to retrieve. I had seen it in her closet during the last holiday season and thought nothing of it. Now it was on Liam's back, and the two of them were walking through the hospital corridor of the institution where Elena worked like people who moved through shared space without having to think about it. Elena saw me first. Something crossed her face. Not guilt, which would have been almost easier to read, but a kind of startled recalibration, the expression of someone encountering a version of events they had not prepared for. She crossed the distance between us quickly and said my name with the particular warmth she deployed when she wanted to reset a room. I smiled at her. I looked at Liam. I said it was good to see them both. Then I told her I had to be somewhere, and I walked to the elevator, and I pressed the button, and I did not look back. That night I sat in my apartment for a long time. I had moved efficiently into the vacancy Elena's slow withdrawal had created, made decisions, booked the surgery, stopped waiting, but I had not yet fully articulated to myself what I was grieving. It wasn't the coat. It wasn't even Liam, who was nothing more than a man who had been handed access that I had slowly been locked out of. It was the specific quality of being someone's person, the texture of mattering to another human being in all the small daily ways, the wine lists and the tie questions and the restaurant menus, the kind of intimacy that lives in the trivial and dies there first when something is wrong. I had loved Elena Mercer for 4 years. I had loved her with the kind of attentiveness that some people find suffocating and some people find safe, and I had watched her find it increasingly easy to look away from. I went into surgery the next morning without telling her. This was not a dramatic choice. I had made the appointment. I had signed the paperwork. The anesthesiologist was excellent, and the procedure took 3 hours and went without complication. I woke in a recovery room with a nurse checking my vitals, and a window showing a gray November afternoon, and a phone with 14 missed notifications. 8 from Elena, 3 from her younger sister Maya, 2 from my colleague Derek, and 1 from a number I didn't immediately recognize. I did not check them. I lay in the recovery bed and watched the gray light change and felt, underneath the pharmacological fog, something that was not quite relief and not quite grief, but was distantly related to both. Elena arrived at the hospital 2 hours after I was transferred to my room. I heard her voice in the hallway before she appeared, the particular authoritative register she used in medical settings, crisp and certain, and then she was in the doorway looking at me in the hospital bed with an expression I had not seen on her face in a very long time. It was the expression of someone who had arrived too late to a thing they did not know was ending. She sat in the chair beside the bed, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she asked why I hadn't told her. I looked at the ceiling. I told her what I had told myself for months, that I'd handled it, that I hadn't wanted to bother her, that she was busy. She said that wasn't an answer. I turned my head and looked at her properly for the first time in what felt like weeks, even though we had been in the same city, the same social circles, the same apartment on Thursday evenings. I asked her when she had last read one of my messages the same day I sent it. She didn't answer. I asked her how long Liam had been wearing my coat. The silence that followed was a different quality than the ones before it. Not frozen, not recalibrating, but honest, which was the thing I had been waiting for without knowing how to ask for it. She told me it wasn't what I thought. I told her I didn't know what I thought, which was true. She told me Liam was struggling, that her mentor's death had left him genuinely isolated, that she had been trying to be present for him the way her mentor had once been present for her. I listened to all of it. I believed most of it. What I said, quietly, from the hospital bed with an 4 in my arm, was that I understood all of that, and it still didn't explain why I had become someone she couldn't find the time to answer. She looked at her hands. She said she hadn't realized. I said I knew she hadn't. That was the part that I had been carrying alone for 6 months, the part that had quietly rerouted me from someone who asked her everything to someone who asked her nothing, not out of cruelty or strategy, but out of the simple self-protective instinct that kicks in when you begin to understand that your need is not being met, and that waiting for it to be met is slowly making you smaller. The transfer to New York came through while I was still in the hospital. Derek forwarded the confirmation to my email, and I read it on my phone with Elena sitting across from me, and I told her. She went still. She asked when. I said 6 weeks. She looked at the window, and then back at me and asked if I had decided to go. I told her I had applied. I told her I hadn't decided anything yet beyond that. She nodded slowly, and I watched her understand, perhaps for the first time, that the version of me who would have agonized over this decision in her direction, who would have needed her to weigh in, who would have forwarded the email immediately and waited for her to tell him what to feel. That person had left quietly while she was looking elsewhere. The next 3 weeks were strange and careful. Elena began to show up differently. She texted back within the hour. She asked about my recovery with the specificity of someone who actually knew what the procedure had involved. She sent me a referral for a physical therapist she personally recommended. She appeared at my apartment on a Wednesday, which had not been a Thursday, with food she had cooked herself, which was not something she had done in over a year. I let her in. I ate the food. I did not perform gratitude, and I did not perform coldness. I was simply, for perhaps the first time in our relationship, entirely honest about what I was experiencing, which was that I cared about her and had cared about her through the full duration of her withdrawal, and that caring had not stopped. It had simply stopped waiting. Liam came to see me once. This I had not expected. He knocked on my apartment door on a Saturday and stood in the hallway in his own coat this time and said, plainly, that he owed me an apology. He said Elena had never done anything that crossed the line, but that he had used her goodness carelessly, and he had known it and hadn't stopped. He said he was leaving Seattle, a position in Boston. His own decision. He said he thought I should know. I looked at him for a long moment. He was not a villain. He was a grieving person who had leaned too hard on the nearest available warmth. I told him I appreciated him coming. I meant it. We did not shake hands, but we nodded, and he left, and that was the end of something that had never quite had a name. I went to New York. I told Elena, the week before I was set to leave, over dinner at the Italian place we had always meant to try and kept postponing, that I was going. She looked at me across the table and said, with a steadiness I recognized as her trying very hard, that she understood. I told her that wasn't the question. She asked what the question was. I told her the question was whether she wanted to be part of whatever came next, genuinely, not out of the guilt of almost losing someone to a surgical table while she was on a different continent, but because she had decided, on her own with no prompting from me, that I was someone she wanted to choose. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said yes. I told her I needed her to prove it the way I had always proved it, in the small daily things, in the answered messages, in the showing up. She said she would. I picked up my wine. I did not ask her if it was too expensive. I already knew what I thought. 8 months later, Elena accepted a position at a teaching hospital in Manhattan. She did not ask me first. She researched the program, completed the application, handled the negotiations, and sent me a text after the offer letter arrived. A single message that said, "I handled it. Don't worry." I read it standing on a sidewalk in November, with the city moving around me and something unlocked in my chest that I hadn't realized was still braced. I stood there for a moment. Then I typed back, "I know," and I started walking.